Welcome. You're tuned into Life is a Sacred Journey. Every week, we bring a new perspective to aging and caregiving. Here is your host, Micheal Pope.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the virtual neighborhood of Life is a Sacred Journey. I now know, since I've been recently out of the country, that saying good evening is appropriate. So to all of our followers and listeners where it is evening, I hope you have a good night's rest as you go to sleep this evening, but thank you for joining us at Life is a Sacred Journey. My name is Micheal Pope, and I am your host of Life is a Sacred Journey. We've been doing this for quite some time now, and our primary, when we began Life is a Sacred Journey, our primary goal was to really connect with caregivers. We started by just talking about the role of caregivers. We had caregivers coming on and really talking about what they needed in order to be a caregiver that felt like they were being supported by the community around them, as well as they helped to enlighten policy and things of that area. Then we came fast forward to the pandemic. And we started focusing on the pandemic and caregiving and the pandemic. And, you know, we have had wonderful authors and individuals who are in the field of caregiving and you know, Rob Espinoza, you know, all of my good friends. And then we realized that we also, by lifting up caregivers, had an opportunity to have a self-help, you know, I know that the self-help sort of platform is saturated, but we realized that the things that we were talking about were possibly enhancing the lives of other people who were coming to Life as a Sacred Journey. And that's only because people were telling us that. So we were responding to that telling. So I want to thank all of you who support Life is a Sacred Journey. There's all these noises going on around me right now, who come back every single Friday at 8 a.m. Please hit the share button. Tell other people. We really appreciate that you do that. That helps our numbers to grow. And you know, that's what a part of this is about. But for me, it's more about coming and sharing all the information that I have and that I have access to, as well as bringing my authentic self to this platform. So we're going to get started, but again, you have joined us on Life is a Sacred Journey, and I am your host, Micheal Pope. So I want to tell you that, you know, many of you know I love music. Music soothes the savage beast in me. And music is on sometimes 24. Yeah, sometimes I even go to sleep to music. But Pharoah Sanders just recently passed away and moved on to glory or wherever that wonderful universal place where musicians go. Thank you, Pharoah Sanders, for getting me through so many moments of depression and just his music is amazing. If you don't know who Pharoah Sanders is, one of my favorite musics or CDs from him is Journey to the One by Pharoah Sanders. I'll put it closer so you can see it. Journey to the One. And there's a beautiful song. The whole thing is just beautiful. So if you're into jazz or think you might want to get into jazz, Pharoah Sanders is one of the amazing, but it's jazz, but it's spiritual. It's I don't even know it's music. It's like the higher power music. So check it out. I really am. So I listened to it on the way here this morning. The other thing that I want to share with you that my daughter has hit me to, and this is really good for when we were talking about our health and mucus and inflammation and all of those things. Well, she has hit me to this oh boy, it's morning. Turmeric, ashwagandha, Indian superfood with curcumin. So she's introduced me to this. The vendor is Vadman, I believe. I went online, I was able to find it, but oh my gosh, it is a super blend of turmeric, ashwagandha, lemongrass, black pepper, and licorice. All great things for your stomach, all great things for your circulation. And so I always tell you, whenever I find something new that I like, I will share it with you. I love these kind of tea bags because it's not the bleached, tea bag that they usually put tea in. I love these. And I also want to thank my sister, Pastor Stacy. She's a tea person, and she's hipping me to the different flavors of tea. I think I'm still a coffee drinker, but tea is, I'm trying to get there. So good morning again. Welcome to Life is a Sacred Journey. Hit the share button. Say good morning to each other. If you're with us on Facebook Live, say good morning to each other. Let each other know that you care. Even if you don't know each other, you do. All of you that come back every Friday, you know each other now. So say good morning to each other. Let's talk about caregiving. Recently, I have had a lot of interaction with our caregivers, new caregivers that are coming out of the pandemic and coming back into needing services or just needing services for the first time. And one of the things that I am noting and really embracing and trying to figure out a way to support and help is that the stress that they have been holding on to throughout the pandemic or even before has come to a crescendo. And many of them now are just feeling overwhelmed with the caregiving process, overwhelmed with even the fact that we're not open more hours, all of the kinds of things that when you get to your wits' end, as they used to say, I don't know if they still use that terminology, but to your wits' end, that you need support and help. So I thought that since this was another pondering, that I would go a little deeper into caregiving. And I've used materials from the National Alliance from Caregiving, AARP, Alzheimer's Services of the East Bay, the Area Agency on Aging here in Alameda County, and just a variety of books and resources that I have at my disposal to kind of bring you some facts so that you know what's going on around caregiving. So fact number one is the caregiver comes in many tapestries. Many paintings. They're not just the traditional caregiver that we're used to talking about. Primarily is the spousal caregiver, older, over 65, caring for their loved one, their partner, spouse. The typical heterosexual male, female, older, one having some cognition, usually challenges, or other cancer or other diseases that put them in a state of disability. Okay, so whether it's physical or cognitive disability, the individual needs to be supported 24/7 by the individual that lives with them, and that's our traditional understanding of caregiving. Then we now move into a time where the typical or the traditional lens that we see caregivers is no longer. And we now have caregivers that come from many, many groups. And again, it's just a reflection of possibly our growing and understanding that the world is becoming and has always been a melting pot of all cultures, all genders, all ages, all. And so because of that, now we are beginning to recognize that each of the stages of life, each of the groups, gender that we label ourselves in, we all have unique experiences as it relates to life. right? And if we're talking about caregiving, then we're talking about caregivers from different parts of life, of who we are as a humanity and how the criteria in which we live. So the first caregiver that I want to talk a little bit about, because I'm learning more and more about it, is the millennial caregiver. Millennial caregivers are 30.2. I always love when they write it that way, but 30 years old average, and are the most diverse generation of caregivers of all time, which means race, ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation. Millennial caregivers are more often single, never married, and have a lower household income than older generation caregivers. They typically are caring for a parent or a grandparent who is 59.5 years old with 1.8 conditions, typically a long-term physical condition followed by short-term physical conditions, emotional, mental, and cognition. So you can see that the average individual who is a millennial, meaning 30 and up, my son is a millennial, is looking at possibly caring for their grandparent or parent. Their income is less than what the income was for the individuals that they were caring for. Key, okay, for the millennial. So let's dig into that a little bit. So the millennials' income is being looked at, not looking just at the Silicon Valley millennials and the millennials that are making these enormous, and even they aren't anymore making. We heard back in the pandemic, excuse me, that there were folks working in the Silicon Valley, but they were living in trailers in the parking lot of Google or wherever. So I don't know what that means because I don't know what the salaries are. But again, from this research, what they're saying is millennials at that age, at 30, 34 years of age, are making less than the people that they're caring for, mother, parents, grandparents, were making at that time. So do you see what I'm saying? And at that time, possibly their parents and grandparents at that age were not caring for an elder, but they possibly were caring for children. So we have there's a disapportionment of resources when someone has to care for their loved one out of their income. And then if the elder person has more money and owns their property and all of that, then does it mean that the single, it said usually single, is that single individual giving up their independence and autonomy and then moving in to the home of the parent or grandparent? And the answer to that is yes. That's primarily the relationship that happens because the single millennial is living usually in an apartment or in a roommate situation, and so it's easier for them to move in with the parent or the grandparent. Easier in the sense that they have an easier mobility, but it's not easy because then a social life that they once had, they may not want to bring into the home of their parent or grandparent. And if the grandparent or parent is ill, then all of a sudden this person now, their social life becomes very, very different. And so this is where we're seeing the stressors on the millennials, where they're at the height of their let's go out, let's be engaged, let's have people over. That gets thwarted with the caregiver relationship. And so then how do they continue to grow as adults, as well as continue to have those things in their lives that help to release stress? So the millennial caregiver is dealing with those issues, and then they are less likely to report to their supervisor that they are caregiving. There's a stigma around it. and they feel like, they don't want it to affect their performance. But it does, because their performance and attendance at work is diminished if they're trying to juggle both and keep it out of the earshot of an employer. And again, they have more debt. They leave. They're leaving bills unpaid. They're paying them late, and they're borrowing from friends or family to kind of juggle this caregiving relationship. So the finances, and you're going to see across the board, finances was the number one area for every section of the population that is caregiving. Finances was where they said they needed support. So we go from the millennial to the student caregiver, a caregiver, what do I want to say, category that I never thought of until we had someone here at Alzheimer's Services of the East Bay that was supporting. Actually, he's been on, we've interviewed him. He's supporting his mom, who's supporting her aunt. So in doing so, he was going to school and then navigating between classes, who was going to pick up and who was going to do this. But in support of his own mother, he was doing this, but the care was being provided to another generation of family member, the aunt. So student caregivers are usually, again, young and diverse. They are in their 20s and up. They are usually African American, Hispanic, or Asian, and in the topper, they're usually single, and they're usually caring for or assisting with the care of a grandparent that's 61.9 years or above. And so it's in support of, as I outlined before. They need help because, again, the stressors of juggling school and supporting and time management and all of those things create a level of stress for the student caregiver that is beyond the level of stress of just being a student, dealing with tight timelines, finals, midterms, relationships, all of those things that happen to you in your student living time. It's stressful being a student. And so the sense of isolation that, and I'm thinking about the pandemic also, that a student caregiver might be feeling right now is the isolation from even having that time to go to campus, be with people their age, engage and talk about the things that are happening in their lives. But now that got stopped. And then they were probably doing their classes online, which meant there was no time away from the caregiving. And so it was all kind of like a sandwich piling on top of each other. So the typical student caregiver has financial challenges. And again, no different than the typical millennial: stress, need for resources and tax write-off and advocacy around how we support individuals who are on that, excuse me. We need to have better benefits to support low-income, Medi-Cal eligible individuals, but we also need more support for people who are at that threshold where they look like they have a lot of money because they own a home, they may have a little bit of funds in the bank, but they're living Social Security check and maybe pulling a little bit out of that savings and checking a month, just like everybody else. They just have maybe a little longer term before they fall. But if they had a major catastrophe and had to really pull all those resources together, then it wouldn't last very long. And if they had to then go into adding supports into the home, then that diminishes that income and the resources, the financial resources as well. So better systems around finances and around how those finances are distributed and how people get resources within the caregiving world, because it's the same for millennials as it is for student caregivers. Then we go to the typical Gen X caregivers. The Gen X caregivers are 47.6 years. I learned all these new things, old and more racially diverse than older generations, though less diverse than younger generations of caregivers. Gen X caregivers are typically married or living with a partner. About half have children under the age of 18 living in their home, and a more common situation than older generations, meaning the baby boomers. Most have household incomes of at least $50,000, more than younger caregivers, and they typically care for a parent-in-law who is 67 years old and has 1.7 conditions, most often a long-term physical condition. That, again, long enough, if they care for them long enough, it may lead into cognition, all those kinds of things. Gen X caregivers have been caring for their recipients for about 5.2 years longer than the younger generations. Their recipient usually lives with them or nearby within 20 minutes of them, and most are the primary unpaid caregiver. So they're the primary unpaid, that group. Gen X is the primary unpaid caregivers because their incomes are higher, right? So the lower income individuals can get in-home support services and become the caregiver and actually be paid for some of the hours of their caregiving. They can do other things because the incomes are lower. Doesn't make it any better or anything like that, but they have accessibility, Medi-Cal, things like that, whereas possibly the Gen X caregiver does not, because the incomes, if you put them all together, are too high, even though the family member may be able to get the Medi-Cal. It depends on the home. Like if they moved into the family member's home, and there's a lot of different criterion and financial things that we need to look at, as we talk about caregiving and people aging in place, and what that means to the family, what that means to the individual, because where you reside, whether it's your primary residence, and we did vote in some new legislation around that the last time we voted. And so all of those things are changing all the time. And even those of us that claim to be, I claim to be an advocate for seniors, but the reality is I can't keep up with them all the time. We work with the Senior Service Coalition here in Alameda County under the tutelage of Wendy Peterson and Quayle, and we learn so much from them, but they have to stay focused on it to help give it to us so that we can learn, because we would, running the organizations and trying to stay abreast of everything going on so that we can support the lives of individuals in the community. It's daunting. I mean, it's like, it would take, I feel like we should have a researcher down the hall to do stuff for us so that we know, second by second what the new news is. But we're supported by organizations like Senior Service Coalition. So health and well-being, again, for the Gen X, emotionally stressful. It's hard. They maybe have kids. This is what we used to call the sandwich generation. And now we're calling it Gen X. The sandwich generation has children at home that they're still rearing. They may be teenagers, but we all know that's one of the hardest times to be a parent, and stressful because they don't like you and all kinds of stuff happens in their teenage years. And then you're caring for parents, and even if they're living 20 minutes away, you've got to time everything. And what we don't realize is this thing right here, the calendar, the scheduler, the planner, is a very stressful thing when you're having to not just plan for yourself, but you're having to add other names and other appointments and other, you have kids and all of that. So the stress level is high for the Gen X, the sandwich generation caregiver. And again, needing support, respite support, daycare support, financial support, and all of that. That's what they're looking for in all caregivers. It's like the same story. It's the same story. Then we have the LGBTQIA caregivers. The LGBTQ caregiver is usually 42.4 years old and unmarried. The LGBTQ caregivers are most often caring for a parent or grandparent age 65 or older who has 1.9 conditions, often long-term and short-term physical. And here at Alzheimer's Services of the East Bay, we are, because we are in the Bay Area, we see more partners and married couples beginning as they're aging in place, having the same health challenges as everybody else. But what is different is that LGBTQ caregivers are still living with the stigma of being labeled LGBTQ and identifying as LGBTQIA. So the reality is this is a place where labeling sometimes doesn't work. Labeling sometimes hurts the caregiver or the population that we're trying to serve. More and more, we're seeing services that are uniquely put together with paradigms of understanding of terminology, health status, mental health status, and all of those things that are specific to the LGBTQIA community. It's been a long time coming. And so as we look at that, we look at unpaid caregivers that are again, putting in average of, working 36.2 hours a week when employed and are typically paid hourly. Most report their supervisor is aware of their caregiving duties, but more often the caregiver has caused high levels of financial strain, and 2.4 on average say that the impact on it makes it almost for these these couples, makes it so that they can't afford their basic expenses. And so again, finances, and then the emotional again. And then they're saying that LGBTQIA caregivers find it harder to coordinate care between providers than they did in 2015. So it's getting harder, not better. So the assumption, you see, I just had an assumption. The assumption that we're in a communities where we are more commingling and we're more in harmony with our LGBTQIA brothers and sisters implies that they have access to the same things that we do. Not necessarily so. So the LGBTQ caregivers, IA caregivers are going through the same, again, financial, work and finance, health and well-being, stress, mental health, services and supports. And we're hearing in LGBTQIA, the supports are less than they were in 2015 when the same groups, the National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP got together for their report. So it's less. So that's pretty sad because it's 2022 and these facts are from 2020. So they're only 2 years old. Okay, so that's very sad. And then the African-American caregiver and the African-American caregivers are 47.7 years old on average. They are more often unmarried than all other racial ethnic groups and report lower household incomes than non-Hispanic, white, and Asian caregivers. African-American caregivers typically care for a parent, spouse, or grandparent who is 64.9 years old and has 1.7 conditions, usually a long-term physical condition, and about half the time, the recipients live in the African-American caregiver's home more commonly than the non-Hispanic whites. Okay. Again, They say that the African American caregivers have been caregiving everybody. It's about an average of 5.2 years for all the groups. It was that growing now since the pandemic. Again, this was 2022. I mean, this was done in May of 2020. And so the pandemic wasn't even being talked about, even though we were already in it. This report was the facts for it, and the study was already put to bed. So the reality is all of this has changed for everybody. And we can imagine you put the COVID isolation and everything on top of it, and the COVID impact on finances, the COVID impact on the economy around us, gas prices, all of that all of this is probably at least 2 times more, the impacts are 2 times more detrimental to the life of the caregiver and to the life of our communities, because people are struggling, even those who look like they make enough money to survive, but the cost of living has gone up and resources have diminished. And so when that happens, sometimes in economics, the price of things go up. About half of American caregivers, African American caregivers, feel they have no choice in taking on the role, but the majority find a sense of purpose or meaning in the role, more so than non-Hispanic, white, or Asian caregivers. African American caregivers less often report being in excellent or very good health than non-Hispanic, white caregivers. And so apparently, again, everybody handles stress differently. Every ethnic group, culture handles the caregiving situation differently. The African American group is no different than any of the others. And when we look at the Asian caregiver, we see the same sort of thing, but then we see something very different as it relates to seeking help than we do in some of the other areas that usually the Asian caregiver would prefer to do it themselves, and they as a family, because they're very familial. Same thing with our Hispanic culture, same thing with other ethnicities that are a part of the melting pot of our humanity. The more familial sort of culture that they have, you'll find that they will try to carry the load, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but just carry the caregiving challenge, the need to be caregiving for someone in a very different way than other cultures. So we're all trying to understand caregiving in this new paradigm, in this new culture of life that we're living in. Some of us were thrown into it during the pandemic because we didn't have to. Maybe we were visiting with our families when we had the shutdown order, and we stayed. And so we've learned a lot about the stress of caregiving and what it means to not get time away from individuals. I mean, why kids go to school, and yes, for education, but while your child is at school, you go to work and you regroup, or if you're not working and you're home, you're preparing for your children, you're preparing, because I think stay-at-home mom and dads are working and should be applauded for that because of the high cost of daycare, all this stuff that makes up caregiving. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is feeling alone as a caregiver. Caregivers feel alone, and the number in 2020 was 53 million caregivers. 53 million people. Your neighbors, the people you see in the grocery store, the people that you see at Target, the people that you go to your faith-based communities with, they make up this 53 million. And if we, in 2015, it was 43.5 million. So you're looking at like a 6% increase. So if you did another like half of that, that's 3%. You can see that every 2 years or so, if we increased it by 3%, the number of our population continues to convert from not being a caregiver to being a caregiver. So if that's so, and the facts show that it is, that they're stressing out. There's more of us doing it because our loved ones have dementia or Alzheimer's or mental health. Now, mental health is like, skyrocketing. And I'm going to share a story with you about the mental health system, and after I get permission to do so. But the whole idea of feeling alone in all of these situations is mind-boggling, it's demoralizing, and it's creating its own PTSD. That when you feel alone, when you feel like you can't get all the things done that you want to get done, when you can't support the people that you love and you feel like you can't bring enough money in, you can't bring enough food in, you can't bring enough resources in, when you're worried about whether the person is suffering and they can't tell you and you're not doing enough and you don't know the questions to ask the doctor because every time you go to the doctor talks over your head and doesn't give you enough time to really talk to them and evaluate what's going on. The sun just shifted. That's hard. And every time those things happen, the stress just builds and builds and compounds and compounds. So we have people who are caring for their loved ones, caring for their neighbors, caregiving. They're giving care to someone else, as well as trying to navigate this crazy journey of their own life, because we're all learning and changing and morphing every single day. And it's difficult when you have to do it also thinking about the needs of someone else, because sometimes we're selfish and need to be selfish in our transformation as human beings. But when we're caring for somebody else who's depending upon us and who doesn't understand all that, we have to put all that stuff on the back burner and again, shove it down so that we can lift ourselves up to be great caregivers. Creates stress, creates a position of disempowerment for an individual. And when that happens, people begin to implode and explode into the universe and out into the world. And so how do we help them? How do we help in the work environment? And we do have Family Medical Leave Act and all of these different things. But I'm telling you, as a nonprofit, it's difficult for me when somebody has to take time off, whether it's for illness or for something that's happening in their loved one's life. And I'm gonna tell you why, because we're licensed and so strictly licensed that there's no flexibility. And I learned this now. There's no flexibility there, because even when the powers that be understand the job market, understand all of these things, we can get dinged if we don't have a social worker or all of these kinds of things in place. So then how do we, as a respite service provider, live into our mission, not only for the people that we serve, but for the people that come to work here? It can't be one-sided. It has the same love and time and energy that we give to the people we serve. We've got to be able to do it for the people that serve the people who serve, so that we have people who want to do these jobs. And slowly but surely, fewer and fewer people are wanting to go into this field. And even, it's become a field where immigrants are able to come in and get licensed and do the work, but we need to do better by them and stop making these jobs low paying, without benefits, and then expecting individuals to work in a way that quality. Yeah, everybody should do stuff from the bottom of their heart and because they love and all of that, but that's not the story. And so we have to give people incentive to bring their best selves to the table when they come, especially in the care of folks that are living with any amount of disability, physical, mental, or otherwise. Health and well-being for the caregivers. We need to ensure that our caregivers are getting respite, that they are getting the breaks that they need. We need to make sure that programs and models like adult day health care, community-based adult services, we need to say the reimbursement is way too low. It's been way too low for too long, and we're required to have master level individuals on our teams, and these individuals are not coming any longer to programs like ours because we can't pay them. We can't compete with Kaiser and things like that. So when we're working with low income individuals, how come the expectation to provide care at the same economic level as if it were somebody who could afford it? We need to look at that we're saying that the reimbursement for people who are low income can be lower because they are low income, but yet we say we want the services in writing to be equal to those who can pay for it in what they used to call the Cadillac models of care. That kind of doesn't make sense. And so those are the kinds of honest, courageous conversations we need to have. Political, community-based services, caregivers, and those who are even in the seats of saying, I need help, I need to be cared for. And when we do that, and stop defending ourselves for what we've already done in the past, because yesterday was yesterday and it's gone. And unless you have a time machine in your garage, there's nothing that you did or said yesterday that you can go back and change other than saying, I'm sorry, and move forward. So we need to have, finally, in our country, a better conversation about what we're doing around aging in place, around what we're doing for our disabled individuals, about what we're doing for mental health, because now all of it is pouring out of the pot. The pot is boiling over, and we now have communities of great stress and great financial burden, and it's no longer enough to just put a Band-Aid on the resources and services that are needed for people to feel whole. Somebody said to me the other day, and I will leave you with this, they said, Micheal, nothing is equal if one person is on their knees. Think about this. If one person is on their knees and the other person is standing up, the person that's standing up has a better vantage view of everything. And because the person on their knees, if they had to escape, they would be crawling away on their knees. They're also left behind because the person that's standing up can stride forward in a different way. That's an amazing, amazing vision for me. I saw it when the person said it to me. And so I pass that on to you. How many people around you are on their knees while you're striding forward? How many people are on their knees when you're making decisions in your corporations, in your nonprofits, in your homes? How many people are on their knees when you're standing up that need a helping hand so they can stand up too? And when do you think you might be on your knees too? So I close this morning by just saying we're all in this together, and we really need to be in this together. But it takes being courageous and honest about what's happening and not making excuses and having more meetings and creating more documents to make the world change. We have to be a people of action. And I pray that you will join me in that. So thank you for coming this Friday to Life is a Sacred Journey. It's been my honor to have this in-depth conversation with you about caregiving. I hope that you press that share button and share it with others. I'd love to hear your caregiving stories. Put some stuff in the chat. Let us know what your experience is or is not, so that we can share. here as we continue to advocate for the lives of our caregivers, and hopefully for all of us, because at some point we all become caregivers. So thank you very much for joining me this morning. Again, for all of you out there that are experiencing mental health issues that you feel are pushing you to the place where suicide is your only option, please pick up the phone and call 988 or 1-800-273-8255, 988-1-800-273-8255. Please, you're not alone and your life matters. All right, everybody, go out and hug a tree, pet a cat, pet a dog, hug yourself, and know that your life matters and that you can have a wonderful sacred journey life, and you deserve it. And yeah, you deserve it. Have a great weekend. Be good to yourself. Peace.